Good morning. So, does the grace of God work? So, we have two basic options. We can live by the law or we can live by grace. Do they work? Which works better? Well, Paul says about grace, if we live by grace, we are still found to be sinners. Is Christ then the minister of sin by presenting such? And he says, no, not at all. Because if we live by the law, we will also sin. And which sin which is the better option? And Paul says grace is the better option. Grace is the option that is inward, that Christ has come to dwell in us, and he works in us his desires. He gives us new desires. And in a way, it's kind of what were once commands, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, become promises. You're not going to steal anymore. You're not even going to have a desire to lie anymore. A new spirit is put in us, a new desire. Moses gave the law. It was written on the tablets of stone. They are carved in stone, they don't change. But the new covenant came, it was written not carved on stone, but on the tablets of our heart. Not written with ink on paper, but written by the Spirit on our heart. How does that work? Well, it is a new covenant. It is a new thing. I will write my law on your hearts and minds. And then again, Paul says in Philippians, it is God who works in you to will and to do of his good purpose. To will and to do of his good purpose. Sometimes we can will things, but we can't do it. Paul says, I find the will is present, but to do, I do not find. And he says, I have the desire to do it, but I don't have the power to do it. But here in the new covenant, Paul says, God will work in you both to will. He'll give you the desire and to do. He'll give you the power to do it. That's the basis of the new covenant and the way of grace. One area of grace is the sense of it is free. I don't deserve it. I cannot earn it. And Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit because they have a sense of, I cannot do this. I could never pay for my sins. I could never repay God the debt of my sins. I can't. Like the Pharisee and the publican who went to the temple, and the Pharisee says, I am not like this man here. I am not a thief. I pay tithes. I am not a sinner like this man. And then the publican beats his chest, standing afar off, and he says, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. He's poor in spirit. He doesn't even try to say, I'll pay for my sin by quoting all his good works and all that he does and gives. Who went away justified? And of course it was the publican who asked for mercy. He's poor in spirit. He knows he can never repay. There's another aspect of being poor in spirit, and it is, I can't live the Christian life. I cannot do what God expects of me. The bar is too high. I try, but I can't do it. I cannot do it. And it's only when we get to this total sense of poverty in ourselves that we finally kind of say, God, you must do it through me. And then he does do it through us. This is how Romans 7 ends, the last verse ends. Oh, wretched man that I am, or oh, what a complete disappointment I am. I keep trying to live the Christian life, but I keep failing. Who's going to deliver me from myself? And then he says, thanks be to God through Jesus Christ. You know, in church history, and go down through the New Testament, the Old Testament, and church history to the centuries, the people who were most used by God were people who had a complete despair of their own life, but had a complete trust in what God could do on them. If I can find a quote here on it. But, Martin Luther used to say, I fear my own heart more than all the demons of hell. Believers who are the most desperate about themselves are the ones who express most forcefully their confidence in grace. Those who are most pessimistic about man are most optimistic about God. So this is God's way. And you know what's remarkable is that Paul says in Corinthians, he says, people who are so confident in their own ability, in their own righteousness, he says, such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself transformed himself into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed into ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. That was a loud plan. But let me say that again. I won't say the whole thing, but he says, these are false apostles, deceitful workers, ministers of righteousness. These guys are squeaky clean. These guys are just so righteous. These are the false apostles. These are the Pharisees of the apostolic age. These do it all right, but they are inwardly, it's not real. And, inwardly, they've never come to that poverty in themselves. And as a result, they just rely on their own righteousness. It's all external righteousness, it's all comparative righteousness. And, there is something about, and we can finish, Philip Yancey wrote a book called What's So Amazing About Grace. And in it, he it tells a story of a prostitute, and, she's trying to straighten out her life, but caught up in that whole world. And someone says to her, why don't you go to church? And she says, to church? Are you joking me? She says, I already feel so bad about myself. Why would I go to church? Because she knew she'd feel condemned if she went to church. And this is kind of, it's kind of like hospitals. The beauty of hospitals, it is full of bleeding, infected people with disease and all manner of problems. That's the beauty of hospitals. And the beauty of church is that it is filled with sinners who have found the grace of God, and sinners who are poor in spirit and who put no confidence in the flesh, and who just rely poor in spirit and rely wholly on the grace of God. Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.